how my family created the world's most dangerous man. She describes Donald Trump as a sociopath who grew up in a dysfunctional family that fostered his greed and cruelty, which he is now inflicting on the world.
Hi, I'm Mary Trump. Yes, the other one of those. You might know my uncle is the authoritarian, convicted criminal con man currently wrecking the country from the safety of the Oval Office. But for the vast majority of my life, I've just known him as a fucking loser. So, unlike most political commentators, I come at this with insider knowledge. I know exactly who Donald is, and I'm not afraid to say it, and I will never pull punches.
Donald Trump resurfaced once again, and predictably, he did not disappoint, though not in the way his supporters might hope. Instead of unveiling groundbreaking ideas or powerful strategies, he delivered the same recycled lines and empty threats, this time aiming his fury at Colorado. But here's the twist that has everyone's attention. The criticism isn't just coming from the usual political opponents or media pundits. No, this time the demolition crew has Trump's own last name painted across the helmet. Mary Trump isn't just voicing criticism, she's unleashing a systematic takedown of her uncle's entire myth. Her words aren't hollow speculation. They come from a place of lived experience, exposing cracks in his carefully polished image that outsiders could only guess at. And those cracks? They're now beginning to split wide open.
Yeah, well, first of all, as a human being, Donald is as bad as he's always been. This is somebody who's never evolved. This is somebody who seems worse behaviorally simply because he's being given more opportunities to be worse. But in terms of his functioning on a cognitive level, absolutely there's been deterioration. I mean, Donald is somebody who has had severe psychiatric disorders for decades that have remained untreated, and any illness you have that you don't treat will worsen. And I think he's being pushed further and further because of Vice President Harris's success, because of his own failures, into a world that is more delusional. When he talks about how enthusiastic the crowd at the debate was, he's probably talking about himself. He was his audience for that debate in many, many ways.
Mary Trump's attacks land with terrifying accuracy because she doesn't need secondhand gossip. She's seen the dysfunction from the inside, growing up under the same roof where Donald learned to mask insecurity with bravado. Unlike critics who rely on headlines or scandals, she understands the machinery that powers his entire performance. She describes his obsession with appearances, not substance, and paints him as a man who values branding above achievement. Think of it: Trump Steaks, Trump Water, Trump University, all failed ventures that never needed to succeed. The goal was never excellence, only projection. To Mary, Donald isn't a leader at all. He's a marketing product disguised as a man, endlessly desperate for validation. And the tragedy? That desperation has shaped not only his career, but also his presidency.
The only way Donald has changed, because he was always a bully, even when we were in the backyard playing baseball, I was 6 and he was 28 or however, I don't remember how much older he is than I am, but in his late 20s and I'm a little 6-year-old kid, he would still throw the ball as hard as he could at me. He did it once. I thought I'd broken every single bone in my hand, because he has to win, he has to be better than, etc. So he's always been that guy.
But the real shock comes when Mary dives deeper into the psychological wounds that fuel Donald's every move. She paints him as a child who never learned empathy, who confused cruelty with strength because that's what his environment rewarded. For him, kindness was weakness. Vulnerability was failure, and humility was unthinkable. And so, as an adult, he lashes out constantly, mocking, insulting, and belittling, because deep down, he fears being seen as fragile. His insults, Mary argues, aren't weapons of dominance. They're shields, hastily thrown to hide the terrified child still living beneath the bluster. This is why every opponent becomes an enemy, every critic a traitor. To Trump, survival means never admitting fault, never revealing fear, and never letting the mask slip. But masks don't last forever.
He never felt safe. He never felt loved. And I think if you start from that kind of deficit and you never find somebody to fill in the gaps or to heal you, then you are sort of at the mercy of anybody who may find you of use. Unfortunately, my grandfather is ultimately the person who did the most damage to Donald, because he exploited Donald's weaknesses, and he exploited the damage that had been done to him, because the defense mechanisms Donald had to utilize in order to protect himself from the loneliness and fear he experienced when his mother was absent from him.
Colorado's sudden rise to Trump's enemies list is no coincidence. It's a pattern Mary describes with precision. When Trump feels cornered, he doesn't reflect, he lashes out. Blue states, critical governors, outspoken journalists, all become convenient targets. But this time, his fury carries a dangerous edge. He isn't just ranting, he's testing boundaries, inching closer to open hostility against states that resist him. Courts may eventually step in, but Mary warns that by the time rulings arrive, damage is already done. This is Trump's true power, not in strategy or brilliance, but in his ability to create chaos faster than the system can contain it. And behind every outburst lies the same fragile truth: a man terrified of losing control, fighting desperately to keep the illusion alive. Mary's commentary becomes especially devastating when she dismantles the myth of Trump's success. The self-made billionaire image, she insists, is a carefully spun fairy tale. In reality, he was propped up by endless handouts, gifts, and bailouts from his father, amounting to hundreds of millions over a lifetime. Yet even with this golden cushion, Donald managed to leave behind a trail of bankrupt casinos, failed products, and shattered ventures. Mary compares him to the kid who cheats at Monopoly, flips the board when he loses, then demands to be declared champion anyway. It's not brilliance driving him, it's entitlement and insecurity. And when that illusion of power falters, he panics. The man who brands himself as untouchable is, in truth, one of the most fragile figures in American politics.
Because he lost so badly to Joe Biden that I didn't think he would ever want to put himself in a position of losing again. And I think that would have been the case if not for two things. One, that he seems still to be getting away with everything, right? And two, the Republican Party is trying to engineer a system in which the minority can come into power because of all of these. I think we're up to hundreds now of voter suppression bills that are being passed in every single state. So if they are successful in doing this, if they are successful in rigging the system even more in their favor, then if Donald gets the message that if he runs, he can't lose because it's going to completely break his way, then I'm not so sure. And that's pretty depressing.
What Mary highlights most chillingly is Donald's insatiable hunger for validation. She says it's not politics driving him, it's addiction. Every rally, every cheer, every crowd chanting his name is like oxygen keeping him alive. He doesn't see those events as governance, he sees them as therapy sessions. When the applause fades, the panic sets in, and that's when his anger explodes. Mary likens him to a performer who never leaves the stage, terrified of silence because silence means irrelevance. This, she argues, is why he lies so compulsively. Lies aren't strategy for him, they're survival tools, rehearsed lines to keep the show going. And when the lights dim, Donald scrambles desperately for the next spotlight, the next headline, the next cheer, because without it, he risks fading into nothing.
I've known Donald Trump all of my life. He's the same man now as he was when I was a child. He's incapable of changing. And if we let him anywhere near the levers of power again, that would be one of the worst mistakes this country could ever make. And I believe at that point, the American experiment would be over.
And the lies, oh the lies. Mary pulls no punches in describing Trump's relationship with the truth as non-existent. She mocks his compulsive dishonesty, calling it less a tactic and more of a reflex. Even when the truth wouldn't damage him, he still chooses fabrication. Why? Because truth feels foreign, dangerous, even threatening. To Trump, lies are comfort food, instantly gratifying even if they rot credibility over time. Mary compares him to a magician who can't stop pulling scarves from his sleeve long after the trick has ended, until the audience is groaning. But unlike a magician, Trump isn't entertaining. He's governing, or at least pretending to, and the result is a presidency where fiction outpaces fact, leaving Americans trapped in a hall of mirrors, struggling to separate illusion from reality. Mary's roast cuts even deeper when she addresses Trump's warped concept of loyalty. For him, loyalty isn't mutual respect, it's servitude. He demands blind devotion from allies, yet discards them the moment they stop praising him. Mary portrays him as a man who surrounds himself with sycophants, mistaking flattery for friendship. The second anyone questions him, they're labeled as disloyal, attacked publicly, and replaced with someone more obedient. This obsession with loyalty isn't strength, it's weakness disguised as dominance. True leaders inspire loyalty. They don't purchase it with fear. But Trump has never understood that. Instead, he builds echo chambers so tight that reality can't seep in. Mary calls this his greatest weakness, living in a world of applause where truth becomes drowned, and the consequences of failure remain invisible until it's too late.
One of the things he's most afraid of is being found out, to be, to have people understand that everything about him that's projected publicly is based on a myth, that he's literally nothing of who he claims to be. He's nothing other people have purported him to be, starting with my grandfather, who's the man responsible for having created this myth. Then we understand that that's where we attack him. If we understand that he has to, like, in order to protect his psyche, in order to protect his extraordinarily fragile ego, has to project this idea that he's the greatest, the best. He's always speaking in hyperboles. He's trying to convince himself as much as he's trying to convince you, me, or everybody else, right? Then we understand that he doesn't really believe it either. So we attack those points as well. I continue to think that the best weapon against Donald Trump is mockery and just revealing all of those weaknesses, because otherwise he's going to continue to get away, as he has now for decades, with everything he's done with impunity. And shockingly, he's much more powerful and protected now than he ever was.
Perhaps the most haunting part of Mary's commentary is her dissection of Trump's legacy. Every president wants to leave a mark, but Donald's obsession with rewriting history borders on desperation. He compares himself to Lincoln, Washington, and Roosevelt. But Mary points out the absurdity. Lincoln freed the enslaved. Roosevelt saved America from collapse. Trump? His legacy is bankrupt casinos, feuds with celebrities, endless lawsuits, and late-night tweets that read more like drunken rants than statesmanship. Mary argues that Donald doesn't fear being remembered as a villain. He fears being forgotten altogether. That's why he clings to the spotlight with such ferocity. Because the moment history moves forward without him, the carefully built persona collapses, and he's revealed not as a titan of politics, but as a cultural punchline. Then comes the subject Donald dreads most: his family's role in constructing the illusion. Mary drops the hammer by exposing how her grandfather's money fueled the so-called self-made mogul image. Over 4 decades, Fred Trump funneled more than $400 million into Donald's projects. Yet even with that staggering fortune, Donald repeatedly failed. Mary delivers the most devastating line when she says, "Even a potato could succeed with $410 million, but Donald didn't." That brutal comparison cuts to the heart of the myth. He wasn't a genius businessman. He was a reckless spender shielded from consequences by endless bailouts. And as Mary makes clear, this pattern of failure isn't just personal. It defines his political career too. A man who never earned success is now desperately trying to buy legacy with bluster.
We need to be really clear-eyed about what might happen. First of all, he's going to do anything in his power to make sure that doesn't happen. And we already see he's cheating already, by telling people that it isn't safe to vote by mail in the middle of a pandemic, by telling people that if Joe Biden wins, it will have been rigged. That's cheating. Because he's using the power of the Oval Office to get that message across. If, however, Joe Biden does win, it kind of depends on the margin of victory. If it's a huge landslide and nobody can pretend that it's an illegitimate result, I think Donald is much more likely to try to spin it as America's loss. He was the best thing that ever happened to this country, and we don't deserve him, so he's going to go do something really important, like build Trump Tower in Moscow or something.
Mary doesn't just stop at Donald's finances. She also takes a scalpel to his treatment of women. She paints a disturbing picture of a man who constantly demands admiration from women, but returns only disrespect. To her, this isn't just misogyny, it's insecurity in disguise. Trump, she says, surrounds himself with beauty as if it might camouflage the chaos inside him. He brags about conquests, flaunts trophies, and parades his relationships not as genuine bonds, but as props to sustain his ego. Yet Mary makes it clear, beneath the posturing lies a man haunted by irrelevance, terrified that admiration can vanish as quickly as it appears. The irony is crushing. He treats women as ornaments, but what he truly seeks is validation he can never secure, no matter how loudly he demands it. Trump's obsession with power, Mary argues, is rooted in fear rather than strength. From his earliest days, he learned that survival meant crushing others before they could crush him. Instead of evolving, he calcified, forever stuck in a ruthless family environment that rewarded cruelty. Now, as president, he confuses intimidation with leadership. His insults, his attacks, his endless feuds, they're not signs of dominance, but of fragility. Mary describes him as a child still fighting playground battles, only now the stakes are terrifyingly higher. The chilling reality is that this mindset doesn't just affect his family anymore, it affects the entire nation. His refusal to embrace accountability, his rage at critics, his obsession with control, all of it stems from the same terrified boy trying desperately to impress a father who never approved.
I mean, he's so blatantly stupid. He's a punk, he's a dog, he's a pig, he's a con, a bullshit artist, a mutt who doesn't know what he's talking about, doesn't do his homework, doesn't care, thinks he's gaming society, doesn't pay his taxes. He's an idiot. Colin Powell said it best. He's a national disaster. He's an embarrassment to this country. It makes me so angry that this country has gotten to this point, that this fool, this bozo, has wound up where he has. He talks how he wants to punch people in the face. Well, I'd like to punch him in the face. This is somebody that we want for president? I don't think so. What I care about is the direction of this country. And what I'm very, very worried about is that it might go in the wrong direction with someone like Donald Trump. If you care about your future, vote for it.
The cruelest irony, Mary says, is that Trump measures everything by image, but understands nothing about true strength. He thinks volume equals power, lawsuits equal justice, and fear equals respect. But Mary flips the script. Real strength, she argues, is resilience, honesty, and the ability to face consequence. Trump possesses none of these. That's why he lashes out when challenged, why he sues when cornered, why he invents myths about his greatness. Silence terrifies him because silence exposes reality. History may move forward without him. Mary warns that Donald is less a commander-in-chief and more a tragic figure, desperately clinging to myths as they unravel. The emperor isn't just without clothes, he's without substance, a fragile echo of bluster collapsing under the weight of truth. And once exposed, there's no going back.
They don't want to obey laws, they don't want to obey rules, they don't think they apply to them. And Donald Trump has no moral conscience and no empathy. He does not care about anybody else other than Donald Trump, which is why in his first term he said, Article 2 lets me do whatever I want, Article 2 of the Constitution. The first Trump term, which I call Shit Show 1, was an assault on the rule of law, but it was only like it was like cancer. It was like a stage 1, maybe stage 2. We got to stage 2 right around January 6th, and he was a threat to the rule of law. And then he went into remission. Now he's back. We're at stage 3. Stage 3 is basically where we are ignoring laws and running roughshod over laws. I mean, they're basically refusing to spend money appropriated by Congress, which is against the law. The law requires the president to spend money. The president can't not spend the money that's been allocated for particular subjects. And you've got this guy who's not been appointed lawfully under the Constitution.
Let's talk about that.
Musk. Yep. And so that's stage 3. Stage 4 is going to be, well, these courts are telling me not to obey orders. Why should I? I don't want to obey the law, so why am I obeying the courts? And stage 4 is metastasis. Stage 4 is when democracy can die. and the rule of law can die, and constitutionalism can die. And we unless something happens radically, I can't see how we don't get to stage 4, because the logical path that they are taking, which is that the law doesn't apply to us, and nobody can enforce the law against us.
Even Trump's supporters aren't immune to his fury anymore. Mary notes that as pressure builds, he's begun lashing out at the very base that once cheered his every word. This isn't loyalty, she argues. It's insecurity turned inward. For years, he's demanded devotion while offering nothing in return. But cracks are forming. Supporters grow restless, allies retreat, and Donald, unable to process the rejection, doubles down on anger. Mary paints this as the ultimate unraveling, a man so desperate for applause that he alienates the only crowd still clapping. It's a tragic self-destruction, a leader sabotaging his own support system because he cannot tolerate the faintest whisper of dissent. And in that collapse lies the clearest proof of Mary's thesis. Trump isn't strong at all. He's catastrophically weak.
Donald Trump's niece, Mary Trump, writes, quote, "Nobody liked Donald when he was growing up, not even his parents. As he got older, those personality traits hardened, the hostile indifference and aggressive disrespect that he'd developed as a toddler to help him withstand the neglect he suffered at his parents' hands." She also details Donald Trump's widening cruel streak, a cruelty that's now on display for all of America and the world, frankly, to see for the third general election in a row. Just this week alone, Trump, while at an anti-Semitism event, slammed Jewish voters who don't vote for him, promised to reinstate his cruel travel ban, bar refugees from Gaza, and he platformed an attack from Sarah Huckabee Sanders on Kamala Harris over not having biological children. Is it 3 strikes and 34 felony convictions? You're out? Will America finally say goodbye to Trump in November?
By the time Mary Trump finishes her commentary, Donald's image isn't merely dented, it's annihilated. She doesn't just roast him as a political figure, she dissects him as family, revealing insecurities that headlines could never capture. The cruelty, the lies, the obsession with image, it all stems from the same bottomless void, a fear of being ordinary. Mary concludes that Trump isn't a titan of history, but a tragedy of ego, a man who built an empire of myths only to watch it collapse under truth. He's not remembered as a leader, but exposed as a cautionary tale. And perhaps the most devastating part of all, Mary doesn't even have to exaggerate. She simply holds up the mirror. And in that reflection, the myth of Donald Trump crumbles beyond repair.